Most people watching Cleveland this offseason are looking at the wrong thing entirely. They're locked onto the Watson situation, which at this point has become so drawn out and so predictable that anyone paying genuine attention already knows how that story ends. They're refreshing their feeds every few days, waiting for the next Gabriel trade rumor to drop. They're debating sixth-round quarterbacks and manufactured storylines that certain media outlets are desperately trying to turn into something meaningful. And while all of that noise is dominating the conversation, something quiet and genuinely important is happening on that practice field in Cleveland that almost nobody is stopping to talk about. This week, buried inside routine minicamp footage that most analysts scrolled past without a second look, there was a signal. Not a loud one, not the kind that generates clicks or gets turned into a segment on a major sports network. The kind of signal that only reveals itself when you know exactly what you're looking for and you're willing to slow down long enough to actually see it. Receivers releasing off the line with a level of technical sophistication that has no business showing up on day one of a professional evaluation. A quarterback operating in a controlled environment and still conveying actual decision-making information to anyone watching closely enough. Rookies competing with the particular urgency of players who understand that nothing in that building is being handed to anyone. That's what stopped everything, and once you understand what it means, it changes the entire conversation about what Cleveland is building, how they're building it, and why the foundation being laid right now might matter far more than anything the headlines have been screaming about. But before any of that makes sense, there's a framework that needs to be established, because without it, everything that follows gets misread. Minicamp is not professional football. That sentence sounds obvious until you watch how many analysts forget it the moment a player does something impressive in shorts and a helmet. There is no live pass rush creating genuine pocket pressure. There is no first-team defense generating the competitive intensity that separates what a player can do from what a player will do when the game is actually on the line. The structural environment is controlled, manufactured, and specifically designed to evaluate without exposing, which means drawing sweeping conclusions about NFL readiness from 3 days of walkthroughs is almost always premature and almost always wrong. Almost. Because here is what minicamp can reveal when you are watching for the right things. Physical preparedness. Not just whether a player looks the part athletically, but whether the body in front of you has been maintained and developed with professional intentionality during an offseason when nobody was checking. Positional ceiling, the technical architecture of how a player moves, releases, breaks, and processes, the raw material a coaching staff actually has to work with. And most importantly, signs of preparation. The single most revealing thing a controlled evaluation environment can expose is the difference between a player who arrived having already completed the private work and a player who arrived hoping their natural talent would carry them through the first impression. That last one is where everything gets interesting with this Cleveland minicamp, because what showed up on that practice field this week was not a roster full of talented athletes hoping instinct would be enough. What showed up was a group of players who clearly treated the offseason before their first professional evaluation as an opportunity rather than a vacation. And that distinction, quiet as it is, tells you everything about the culture being shaped inside that building. Denzel Boston deserves more than a sentence and a move on. He deserves real space, real analysis, because what happened when this man walked onto that practice field is the kind of thing that gets condensed into a one-line mention when it genuinely merits a much longer conversation. The physical profile alone stops you immediately. Long, large, and built in a way that fills the outside receiver position with an imposing presence that Cleveland has been genuinely lacking for years. That absence has not been loudly discussed, it has not dominated the narrative around this offense, but it has quietly constrained the ceiling of everything this team has tried to do offensively, and if you've been watching closely enough, you have felt it in almost every game this team has played. When people saw Boston for the first time, the Josh Gordon comparison started circulating almost instantly, and understanding why that comparison emerged instinctively matters more than whether the comparison is ultimately accurate.
Gordon, at his peak, was a boundary target who forced defensive coordinators to dedicate genuine coverage resources to the perimeter, a player who drew real safety attention because leaving him on an island was genuinely dangerous. A red zone presence that changed how defenses were structured before the ball was even snapped.
Boston's physical profile creates that same structural problem for defenses, not because he is Josh Gordon, and not because any new player should carry the weight of that comparison. Gordon, at his absolute best, was operating at a level that belongs in a completely different conversation, and holding a rookie to that standard would be unfair and analytically lazy. But the underlying observation that the comparison is pointing toward is truthful and worth stating directly. This receiving room has had a genuine and enduring void at the boundary receiver position. Boston's arrival addresses that void in a way that is not about hope or optimism. It is about the physical reality of what has been missing and what his presence structurally provides. But here is where the real story lives, and it is almost always the part that gets skipped over. What those early sessions revealed about how Boston actually operates routes matters far more than any description of his physical profile. Because in those drills, he was not winning on size alone. He was not simply overwhelming defensive backs with length and overwhelming athleticism, the way a player who has not yet learned the position often does in the early stages of a professional career. He was exhibiting genuine route intelligence, using his frame to create positional leverage before his breaks, setting defenders with release stems and exploiting their alignment tendencies before executing cuts. The technical understanding was still in its early developmental stages. That is completely honest and completely expected. But the type of pre-snap and in-route processing he demonstrated is the thing that separates athletic profiles who are still figuring out what the position requires from receivers who genuinely comprehend what it demands at the professional level. And seeing it on day one of a professional evaluation is not something you can manufacture or fake. Because that level of route sophistication does not just appear. It is not installed during 3 days of walkthrough sessions while coaches are still learning names. It does not emerge from talent alone, no matter how impressive the talent is. It takes months of solitary, intentional, private work to build that kind of technical refinement. Empty gyms, sessions with coaches and trainers where nobody is filming and nothing is being posted. Repetition upon repetition in environments where no credit is being given and no attention is being rewarded. Boston had already completed that work before he ever stepped onto that practice field in Cleveland. It was visible immediately, and the consequences of that for what this offense is capable of becoming are genuinely significant in ways that have not been fully explored yet. Shedeur Sanders has shown throughout his college career that his greatest strengths live in the intermediate areas of the field, the accuracy into tight windows, the willingness to attack coverage that most quarterbacks would avoid, the processing speed that allows him to operate efficiently within a structured offensive concept. But every one of those strengths has been quietly limited by the absence of a boundary receiver who forces defensive coordinators to devote real coverage resources to the perimeter. When defenses can shade coverage toward the middle without genuine fear of what is happening on the outside, the intermediate windows get tighter. The coverage allocation problem that makes this offense truly dangerous gets significantly reduced. Boston's physical profile, combined with the route intelligence he demonstrated in minicamp, creates a coverage problem that Cleveland's offense has been unable to generate for a long time. If what he showed in those early sessions reflects his true developmental trajectory, the structural ceiling of this entire offense rises in a way that the current conversation is not fully accounting for. An honest evaluation of KC Concepcion requires something that a lot of coverage around this minicamp has not been willing to offer. It requires both sides of the ledger presented with full clarity, without softening one to celebrate the other, and without condemning the entire profile because of one. There were drops,
That needs to be stated directly and without the kind of context cushioning that Minicamp often invites. Drops in professional football are not just negative statistical moments that get absorbed into a weekly box score and forgotten. They create psychological friction between a quarterback and a receiver that does not simply disappear when the next play starts. They subtly influence play-calling decisions. They affect a quarterback's willingness to go to that receiver in high-pressure moments when the window is tight and the game is genuinely on the line. Over time, an accumulation of drops erodes exactly the kind of operational trust that a quarterback needs in a target to throw to him when everything matters most.
Concepcion's hands need to improve dramatically. Saying anything less than that directly would be doing a disservice to everyone. That is the primary developmental challenge in front of him, and it needs to be treated as exactly that. A challenge that requires committed, concentrated daily work to solve. But condensing the entire evaluation into the drops conversation is its own form of analytical dishonesty, and a complete assessment demands that what the route tape actually revealed gets the same level of honest recognition. The speed he generates out of his breaks is genuine. The way he is already processing his releases is ahead of where most players at his stage of development tend to operate. The movement principles he applies with his route stems are showing real football intelligence. On a touchdown connection during those sessions, he did not simply outrun his coverage. He established separation through proper route execution and planned timing. The concept worked as intended, and he ran the concept correctly. That distinction matters enormously in evaluation. A player who gets open because the route concept functioned as designed represents a fundamentally different professional ceiling than a player who gets open because he ran past the person covering him. The first one tells you that football intelligence is already developing at a rate worth investing in. The second one simply tells you that he is fast. The first is what Concepcion demonstrated. His feet are already giving the coaching staff real material to work with and develop. The hands need to reach the same level as everything else around them. That is the task in front of him. But the work to fix that issue is being built on top of a foundation that is genuinely worth developing, and that changes the nature of the challenge significantly compared to if those drops were sitting on top of nothing. The Taylen Green situation needs to be addressed directly before a false narrative has time to fully take shape, because the direction certain parts of the media coverage are trying to take this story is already becoming visible, and it needs to be pushed back on clearly. The physical tools are real. The arm talent is immediately apparent. The mobility adds a dimension that conventional pocket passers simply cannot provide, and the physical presence he brought to those early sessions generated genuine excitement from everyone in attendance. All of that deserves full, unqualified credit. None of it is being dismissed or minimized. And alongside all of those attributes, the mechanical release has a length to it that will require significant refinement to consistently hold up under professional pass rush pressure. A tight end was overthrown. Another throw sailed past its intended target in a separate sequence. That is not surprising, and it is not alarming in the context of what Green actually is right now. It is precisely where sixth-round developmental quarterbacks are when they are just beginning their professional careers. The floor is where it is supposed to be. The ceiling is attached to a development timeline that extends years into the future, not months. Here is what needs to be said plainly. An encouraging throw during a no-contact walkthrough does not reopen the Cleveland Browns starting quarterback conversation. Not in any direction, not even slightly, not under any reasonable analytical framework. Green has intriguing physical tools. His long-term development as a backup option over the coming years might produce something worth monitoring closely, but on a team that has committed its entire organizational future to a specific quarterback, a sixth-round developmental player who is still in the early stages of translating raw physical gifts into consistent professional execution is not entering any meaningful conversation about the starting role. The architecture that Cleveland has assembled this entire offseason is built around one conclusion. Shedeur Sanders is the quarterback this organization has decided to build around. Not a single thing that happened in a controlled minicamp environment changes any component of that commitment. The Green storyline is noise. Treat it accordingly.
Now, here is the part that truly matters, the part that the individual player evaluations are all pointing toward when you step back far enough to see the complete picture. What Cleveland is assembling right now has a distinct and coherent internal logic that is easy to miss when you are focused on individual pieces in isolation. But when you look at the organizational architecture underneath all of the player movement, a clear and purposeful design emerges. Boston addresses the boundary receiver void that has quietly suppressed this offense's potential for years. Concepcion's speed and movement versatility create coverage allocation problems in the intermediate areas where Shedeur has already demonstrated the greatest comfort and the highest accuracy. The rebuilt offensive line and the investment in Spencer Fanotti represent a committed organizational decision to build the protective infrastructure this quarterback needs to operate at his actual potential, rather than whatever version of himself survival mode football permits. These are not generic additions filling generic gaps in a generic depth chart. Every significant resource decision this organization has made since the beginning of the offseason reflects the specific offensive philosophy built around one quarterback's particular skill set. The investments are intentional, the targeting is precise, the internal logic is coherent in the way well-run organizations actually operate when they are genuinely building towards something rather than managing decline.
That is what intentional organizational construction looks like from the inside. And recognizing it requires being willing to look past the individual headlines long enough to see the design beneath all of them. There is one more layer to what these minicamp sessions revealed, and it might actually be the most important thing coming out of Cleveland right now, even though it is receiving almost no attention. The culture being actively shaped inside that facility. The first days of rookie minicamp are remarkably effective at exposing one specific thing with exceptional clarity. Who showed up having already completed the preparation, and who showed up hoping their natural talent would be enough to carry them through the evaluation. Those two groups of players look obviously different from each other to anyone who knows what prepared looks like. Boston's route-running intelligence on day one of his professional evaluation did not appear because coaches installed it during 3 days of walkthroughs. It exists because he spent the months before this minicamp in empty gyms and on practice fields, performing individual technical work that nobody was recording, nobody was rewarding, and nobody was watching. Motivated purely by his own understanding of what this opportunity required, he completed that work before he ever arrived. The sophisticated movement principles visible in Concepcion's releases tell the same story. These players treated the offseason before their first professional evaluation as an opportunity to separate themselves, and the decision to approach it that way, rather than as a break they had earned, is immediately visible to anyone who has spent enough time watching prepared athletes versus talented ones. That distinction is everything to an organization that is actually building something real. Players who arrive with their work already completed are the ones who compete for actual roster spots. They are the ones who force coaches to make genuinely difficult decisions. They are the ones who push the players around them to operate at a higher standard simply by demonstrating what full preparation looks like every single day. The culture of a franchise is not built through press conference statements or motivational language in meeting rooms. It is built one offseason at a time, one player decision at a time, one choice between comfort and preparation at a time. And what showed up on that Cleveland practice field this week suggests that the standard being established inside that building is starting to take shape in exactly the way that the best organizations in this league are built. Step all the way back now and look at the complete picture that has assembled itself. Boston processing through route combinations with a level of technical sophistication that only exists because of thorough private preparation completed before anyone was paying attention. Concepcion demonstrating movement qualities that give the coaching staff genuinely useful material to develop, even as the ball tracking reliability demands concentrated and committed work. A rookie class competing with the urgency of players who understand clearly that this organization is not in the business of giving roster spots to anyone, regardless of draft pedigree or perceived potential.
an offensive line being rebuilt with purposeful investment, a receiving room having a genuine structural void addressed for the first time in years, and in the middle of all of it, a quarterback who spent the entirety of his first professional season operating in circumstances that were structurally designed to undermine him, who played behind protection that gave him almost no time to operate, who worked within a receiving group that lacked the weapons to genuinely stress opposing defenses, who, throughout all of that, exhibited the specific traits of character and competitive consistency that persuade organizations to commit their futures to a player, and who is now, for the first time, beginning to watch actual offensive infrastructure emerge around him in the way that the organizational commitment has been promising since the moment he was selected. The Minicamp is the first publicly visible chapter of what that looks like when the pieces finally start coming together in real time. Not the Gabriel trade rumors, not the Watson situation that has been recycled so many times it has lost all meaning, not the Taylen Green narrative that certain media outlets are working hard to manufacture into something it is not. The real story is being written on that practice field by rookies competing with genuine urgency, a coaching staff constructing an offense with deliberate architectural intention, and receivers arriving with their work already completed. That is the signal. Everything else is noise. As training camp approaches and the components that have been assembling all offseason finally begin working together under actual competitive conditions for the first time, that signal is going to get considerably louder. And when this offense finally operates the way the architecture being constructed around Shedeur Sanders is designed to function, a lot of people outside of Cleveland are going to be caught completely off guard by what this team is capable of. The groundwork is being laid, one session at a time, one position group at a time, one prepared player at a time. Cleveland is not surviving another cycle. Cleveland is not managing yet another transitional year while the real window remains perpetually just out of reach. Cleveland is building something with real competitive intention and real organizational coherence behind every decision being made. Pay attention to what is happening on that practice field, because Shedeur Sanders is standing at the center of the most purposefully constructed offensive architecture this franchise has assembled in years, and everything this organization has built this offseason is pointed directly at maximizing what he is capable of. The signal is there. It has been there all week. Most people are just watching the wrong story.